Good morning, you're watching Sunrise. I'm Sarah Jane Mee. The Syrian government says it is hours away from victory in Aleppo, amid growing concern for those who are still inside the city. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has voiced alarm over reports of atrocities against a large number of civilians who are still there. An estimated 415 civilians, including 47 children, are thought to have been killed in rebel-held areas of the city since mid-November. And in the last 24 hours, around 10,000 people are thought to have fled East Aleppo as regime forces make their final advance. This brings the total number of those who have fled the rebel-held areas of the city to an estimated 130,000. Our diplomatic editor Dominic Waghall reports.
It's Syria's biggest city, a commercial hub that once powered the country's economy. But this is what remains of Aleppo now. 4 years of conflict have done incalculable damage. A small pocket of resistance is holding out, but the city's popular uprising against the Assad regime is about to be snuffed out here. As thousands flee the fighting in Aleppo, hundreds of men among them have disappeared. There's now mounting concern about their welfare.
We are getting terrible, terrible reports that some young men, even as young as teenagers, and even as old as up to in their 40s, are also being either subject to executions or being taken to one side. This is of grave concern.
None of that reflected on Syrian state television, just celebrations among Assad supporters at the remarkable revival of the regime's fortunes. Aleppo was late to join the uprising against Assad, but became its fiercest battle. By 2012, rebel forces controlled the area in green to the east, their enemies in red to the west. Only with Russian support, pro-regime forces began to turn the tide, tightening the noose round rebels whose territory shrunk in recent days to this small area, and possibly even less. A lightning advance, backed by intense mortaring and shelling, and Russian support in the air, dislodged rebels from key districts over the weekend. Russia's increasingly open about its involvement. Russian television showing off Spetsnaz, special forces, it says are fighting on the ground. Pro-regime forces are moving through Aleppo now, going door to door, flushing out resistance. The Assad regime and its supporters have victory in Aleppo in their grasp. The city's ruins will soon be theirs. But the war in the rest of Syria goes on. Dominic Waghall, Sky News.
Well, Russia has rejected US calls for an immediate ceasefire in Aleppo, and the UN says Russia and the Assad regime are accountable for any atrocities in the city. Let's go live to Moscow and speak to John Sparks. John, I was just reading on Twitter, somebody from Save the Children was tweeting and saying that they only need an hour of a ceasefire to get everyone that's left in Aleppo out alive.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? It doesn't look like the Americans and the Russians have been able to come to an agreement. It doesn't look like they will come to an agreement in terms of getting a mechanism to get people, civilians and rebel fighters, out of the city. They have been talking for weeks about this in Geneva and in Rome, but one of the main sticking points seems to be a US demand that there be a pause in the fighting for 2 days, for 4 days, for 6 days, to allow people to get out. The Russians are not prepared to give that sort of time, that space, which they say would allow the rebels to redefend, re-equip themselves, to try and hold on to their territory. As long as there are rebels in East Aleppo, say the Russians, the fighting will continue. As for Aleppo, there was a heavy bombardment, we understand, overnight. Quite quietened somewhat this morning, the city now enveloped in fog. We understand from various reports that the regime is now trying to consolidate its control over territory that it captured over the last 24 hours. 11 individual neighborhoods that it managed, the Syrian army and its allies managed to take over the last 24 hours. It's now trying to consolidate its control there. It hasn't made any fresh advances this morning. The Russian MOD, the Ministry of Defense here, came out with a briefing paper a little while ago. It said 7,800 civilians escaped over the past 24 hours, 3,900 of them being children. 375 militants, it says, have surrendered. All of them taken to special humanitarian centers, say the Russians, where they were given hot food and medical assistance if they needed it. But I think we have to treat that with a certain amount of skepticism, certainly the line about the treatment of rebel fighters or militants. Syria, of course, being a country where those who oppose the government can be tortured and have been killed.
John, thank you.